The recruitment station on Nexus Prime was full of noise and movement. Aliens from hundreds of different worlds walked through the huge marble halls. They were all here for the same reason. They wanted to join the Void Wardens, the most famous fighting force in the entire galaxy. Commander Telos watched the crowd from his desk. He was a tall, insect-like creature with hard black shell covering his body. His large eyes could see in every direction at once. He had been doing this job for 30 years. He had seen every type of warrior the galaxy could produce. Giant rock creatures that could crush metal with their hands, mind readers who could kill with a thought, berserkers who felt no pain and feared nothing. Today was like any other day. Aliens lined up to show their battle records. Most were rejected, some were accepted. A few died during the tests that came later. Then the human walked in. Telos almost did not notice him at first. The human was not impressive in any way. He was not tall. He was not muscular. He had dark hair with some mixed in, even though he looked young. He wore simple clothes and carried nothing except a small data chip in his hand. His name was Park. A reptile officer who worked under Telos let out a small laugh when she saw him approach. "Another human," she said to the others nearby. "Their species only started exploring space 200 years ago. What can they possibly know about real war?" Walk to the registration desk without saying a word. He handed over his data chip. This chip contained his complete military record, as required by coalition law. Plugged the chip into the display machine. A holographic screen appeared in the air, showing glowing text that everyone nearby could read. Then started laughing loudly. "Commander, you need to see this," she called out. Her voice was full of amusement. Telos walked over. Other officers gathered around too, curious about what was so funny. The human's record showed 17 different wars. The colony uprising, the Belt Wars, the First Incursion, the Siege of New Sol Station, the Crimson Nebula Campaign, and 12 more after that, spreading across 54 years. 17 wars. A huge rock creature laughed so hard that pieces of gravel fell from his chest. Humans barely live 100 years. This small creature claims he spent his whole life fighting. He probably carried boxes of supplies, another officer said with a sneer. Now he wants to pretend he was a real soldier. Said nothing. He just stood there with his hands behind his back. His dark eyes watched them calmly, showing no anger or embarrassment. Telos was about to send him away, then suddenly stopped laughing. "Commander," her voice had changed completely. The mockery was gone. Now she sounded afraid. "Look at the casualty reports." Telos leaned closer to the holographic display. Each war listed how many soldiers had fought and how many had survived. What he saw made his blood turn cold. The colony uprising, 4,200 human soldiers sent to fight. Survivors, 1. The Belt Wars, 12,000 coalition soldiers engaged. Survivors, 1. The First Incursion, 8,500 human marines deployed. Survivors, 1. The Siege of New Sol Station, 35,000 defenders. Survivors, 1. The list went on and on. 17 wars. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers across 5 decades of fighting, and every single war showed the same number in the survivor column. 1. The recruitment hall had gone completely silent. Every alien in the room was now staring at the display screen. Then they all turned to look at the human who stood quietly before them. "That is impossible," whispered. Her scales had turned pale. The Extinction War killed 14 billion living beings across 3 star systems. Nobody survived that war intact. The records say there were no survivors at all. Finally spoke. His voice was soft and calm. "I survived." The rock creature who had laughed before took a step backward. His rocky face showed confusion and fear. "How?" Telos asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "How can one soldier survive 17 total losses? wars where everyone else died. Looked at the commander with those dark, steady eyes. There was no pride in his face, no boasting, just a terrible, heavy tiredness that seemed to go deeper than his bones. "I am very hard to kill," he said simply. Telos looked at the record again. The silence of Andros VII. That was the most recent war on the list only 3 years ago. 800 scientists and soldiers had vanished from a research station. Coalition investigators found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of fighting, just empty buildings and silence. "You were at Andros VII, Telos said. What happened there?" "Something old woke up beneath the ice," replied. "It took everyone else. I made it angry enough to let me go." The other aliens exchanged nervous glances. Nobody was laughing anymore. Telos studied the human carefully. He had interviewed thousands of warriors. He could recognize lies, exaggeration, and false confidence. This human showed none of those things. He spoke like a man describing the weather. Simple facts, nothing more. "Why do you want to join the Void Wardens?" Telos asked. Was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like grief. "Because there are things out there in the dark spaces between stars. Old things, hungry things. I have been fighting them alone for 50 years. I am tired of watching everyone around me die." He paused. "Maybe with proper soldiers beside me, some of them will survive this time." Commander Telos made his decision. "Report to Testing Bay 7 tomorrow morning," he said. "We will see if your survival skills are real." Nodded once and walked away without another word. Moved closer to the commander. "Sir, you cannot be serious. His records must be fake." "Perhaps," Telos replied, watching the human disappear into the crowd. "But if even half of what that record says is true, he is the most experienced soldier in this entire sector." He paused. "And I want to know how a single human keeps walking away from wars that kill everyone else." In the shadows of the recruitment hall, Park stopped walking. He looked back over his shoulder at the aliens still staring at his glowing battle record. They had laughed at him. They would learn. Commander Telos sent away all the other applicants. He took to a private room deep inside the station. The room was designed for questioning dangerous prisoners. Metal walls, no windows, security machines floating in every corner, neural dampeners built into the ceiling to stop any mental powers from working. Sat calmly in the metal chair. He did not seem worried about the security measures. He did not seem worried about anything at all. Telos settled his large insect body into the chair across the table. His compound eyes studied the human carefully. "Your records are impossible," the commander said. "I checked with Coalition headquarters. Most of the wars on your list have no survivors at all. They are listed as total losses, complete failures. Everyone died." "That is correct," replied. "Everyone did die." "Then explain how you are sitting in front of me right now." Was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a strange weight. It was the voice of someone who had seen too much and lived too long. "Do you know why humans were so late to join the galactic community, Commander?" Telos made an impatient clicking sound with his mandibles. "Your species was primitive, slow to develop technology." "No, we developed faster than almost any species in recorded history," leaned forward slightly. "We went from our first flying machine to nuclear weapons in 40 years, from nuclear power to faster-than-light travel in under 2 centuries. We were not slow." "Then why were you late?" "Because we kept killing ourselves." His voice was flat without emotion. "Over and over again. World wars that killed millions. Weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash. We came within minutes of ending our own species at least 12 times before we ever left our home planet." Telos was silent. He had read about human history. It was considered unusual among spacefaring species. Most civilizations stopped fighting each other once they developed weapons powerful enough to destroy themselves. Humans had kept fighting anyway. My point, continued, is that humans learned something that most species never have to learn. We learned how to survive the unsurvivable, not through strength, not through better weapons, not through greater numbers. He paused. Through sheer, stubborn refusal to die. You are suggesting that your survival is based on willpower. I am suggesting that when you spend 10,000 years learning how to crawl out of mass graves, you get very good at it. Telos pulled up the most recent entry on its record. The holographic display showed the words, "The Silence of Andros VII." "Tell me about this one," the commander said. 3 years ago, a quarantine world. The entire population of the research station vanished. 800 scientists and military personnel. Coalition investigators found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just empty buildings and silence. "I know," said. "I was the security chief." "What happened?" His face did not change expression, but something in his eyes shifted. For just a moment, Telos saw something looking back at him, something vast, something terrible, something that had seen things no living creature should ever see. "Something came up from beneath the ice," said quietly. "Something old, older than your species, older than the coalition. It had been sleeping there for millions of years, and our drilling woke it up." "What kind of creature?" "It was not a creature, not exactly. It was more like a hunger that had learned to think, a darkness that was alive." His voice remained calm, but his hands had tightened slightly on the arms of his chair. "It did not kill us, not the way you would understand killing. It collected us. It pulled people into itself one by one, absorbing them into the darkness, making them part of its hunger." "And you survived how?" "I made it angrier than it was hungry." Telos stared at the human. "That does not make sense." "These things feed on fear and despair. They grow stronger when their prey gives up hope. They expect their victims to run, to hide, to beg for mercy." His lips curved into something that was almost a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I did not run. I did not hide. I did not beg. I fought back. For 17 days I hunted it through those dark hallways while it hunted me. I hurt it. I made it bleed, if something like that can bleed. And eventually, I made it so angry that it forgot to be hungry. It let you go. It threw me out, retreated back beneath the ice to heal and sleep again," shrugged, "probably waiting for easier prey." The commander was quiet for a long time. His compound eyes studied the human with new understanding. "You have faced things like this before," Telos said. "It was not a question." 17 times. His voice was tired, so very tired. "The galaxy is full of old things sleeping in dark places, things that existed before your species evolved, things that have eaten entire civilizations and will eat more. The coalition thinks it is fighting pirates and rebels and hostile aliens. It has no idea what is really out there. Why does nobody know about this? Because nobody survives to tell the story, except me." Looked down at his hands. "I have watched thousands of good soldiers die fighting things they did not understand, things they were not prepared for, and every time I am the only one left to write the report that nobody believes." Telos made his decision then. This human was either completely insane or the most valuable soldier the coalition had ever encountered. Either way, the commander needed to know more. "The Void Warden trials begin tomorrow," Telos said. "They are designed to break the strongest warriors in the galaxy. 90% of applicants fail. 10% die." Nodded slowly. "I know. You still want to proceed." The human stood up from his chair. For a moment, he looked older than his years, older than any human should look. The weight of 17 wars pressed down on his shoulders like invisible chains. "I have survived things that make your trials look like children's games, Commander. I have walked through darkness that would drive your best soldiers insane. I have buried more friends than I can count and kept fighting anyway." He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. "Your trials cannot break me. Nothing can break me anymore." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That is the problem." The door slid open, and Park walked out into the corridor beyond. Telos sat alone in the interrogation room for a long time afterward. He kept thinking about what he had seen in the human's eyes. That vast, terrible weight of memory. That absolute certainty that came from facing death so many times it had become boring. For the first time in 30 years of service, Commander Telos felt something he had almost forgotten. Fear. The Void Warden trials were famous across the galaxy. They were designed to find the strongest, fastest, and most dangerous warriors from 1,000 different worlds. Only the best of the best could pass. The rest would fail, give up, or die trying. 47 candidates gathered in the massive training facility on the morning of the first trial. They came from 12 different species: giant rock creatures with arms like tree trunks, reptiles with razor-sharp claws and armored scales, mind readers with pale skin and large dark eyes, berserkers from warrior planets who had never lost a fight. And one human. Park stood at the edge of the group. He was the smallest person there, the weakest looking. The other candidates looked at him with confusion and contempt. "Why is that thing here?" a massive rock creature named asked loudly. He stood 8 feet tall and weighed half a ton. His stone fists had punched through starship armor. "Humans are soft, fragile. He will die in the first hour." Said nothing, he simply waited. The first trial was survival. All 47 candidates would be dropped onto a death world called Seven. They would have nothing except a knife and the clothes they wore. They had to survive for 48 hours. Anyone who died or gave up would be eliminated. Seven was a nightmare planet. The air was barely breathable. The water was poisonous. The animals were all predators that hunted anything that moved. The temperature dropped below freezing at night and rose to burning heat during the day. 32 candidates entered the trial. The others had already failed the medical tests. Landed in a thick jungle filled with strange sounds and moving shadows. He did not panic. He did not rush. He simply looked around, found the direction he needed to go, and started walking. Within the first hour, he had built a shelter. Within the second hour, he had found safe water and edible plants. He moved through the deadly jungle like a ghost, avoiding the predators instead of fighting them, finding paths where others saw only danger. Other candidates crashed through the undergrowth, making noise, wasting energy, fighting everything they encountered. Several died on the first night when the temperature dropped and they had not prepared. Others were killed by the native creatures. Was attacked by a pack of 6-legged hunters on the second day. He killed most of them with his stone fists, but the fight left him wounded and exhausted. When the largest hunter came at him for the final strike, something unexpected happened. A knife flew through the air and buried itself in the creature's eye. Turned to see the human standing at the edge of the clearing. Walked forward calmly, pulled his knife from the dead animal, and kept walking without saying a word. 19 candidates emerged from Seven after 48 hours, walked out without a single scratch on his body. 3 of the other survivors, including, owed their lives to him. None of them would admit it publicly. The second trial was combat. All remaining candidates would fight in a zero-gravity arena filled with obstacles and weapons. It was a free-for-all battle. The last fighter standing would win. Targeted immediately. The rock creature launched himself across the arena with killing force. His massive fist swung toward the human's head with enough power to shatter concrete. The fight lasted 11 seconds. When the medical team woke up an hour later, he refused to speak about what had happened. But the cameras in the arena had recorded everything. Had not overpowered the rock creature. That would have been impossible. Instead, he had simply known. He knew exactly where would strike before the strike came. He knew where the massive body would lose balance. He knew which joints could be bent the wrong way with minimal force. Watching the recording was like watching water flow around a stone. The human moved with perfect efficiency, wasting no motion, using the enemy's own strength against him. His massive power had become his weakness. 8 candidates remained after the combat trial. The third and final trial was psychological. Each candidate would be placed in a neural simulation machine that forced them to relive their worst memories, their greatest fears, their deepest traumas. Most species could endure about 1 hour before their minds broke. The record was held by a berserker from Prime who had lasted 6 hours. They placed in the machine. The technicians watched their monitors in confusion as the simulation activated. It pulled memories from the human's brain and made him experience them again as if they were happening right now. The Battle of New Sol Station. 35,000 defenders watching as their walls crumbled and darkness poured through. The trenches of the Crimson Nebula. Soldiers screaming as things that should not exist tore through their ranks. The frozen corridors of Andros VII. Friends disappearing one by one into hungry shadows that whispered their names. 17 wars, hundreds of battles, thousands of deaths. The human's vital signs never changed. His heart rate stayed steady. His breathing remained slow and calm. He sat in the chair with his eyes closed as 50 years of horror played out behind his eyelids. After 4 hours, the simulation machine overheated. The technicians had to shut it down before it damaged itself. No candidate had ever lasted long enough to break the machine before. When opened his eyes, he looked at the shocked technicians with something like sadness. "Your machine only shows memories," he said quietly. "It does not understand that for some of us, the memories never stopped playing in the first place. I see those faces every time I close my eyes. I hear those screams every time the room gets quiet. Your machine cannot hurt me because I already live in that nightmare every single day." He stood up from the chair and walked toward the door. I passed, yes. The lead technician could only nod. Left the room. Behind him, the technicians stared at their ruined equipment and tried to understand what kind of person could endure 4 hours of concentrated trauma without flinching. Commander Telos watched the recording from his office. He saw the human's steady heartbeat. He saw the calm breathing. He saw eyes that had looked upon horrors beyond imagination and simply kept going. The other species in the galaxy thought humans were weak because they were small and soft. They thought humans were primitive because they had only recently learned to travel between stars. They were wrong. Humans were survivors. They had spent their entire history learning to endure the unendurable. They had crawled out of ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. They had stared into the face of extinction again and again and refused to stop fighting. Park was not special among humans. He was simply what a human became when you took away everything except the will to survive. And that, Commander Telos realized, was the most terrifying thing of all. Was assigned to Void Squad 7 along with 9 other survivors of the trials. Their first mission seemed simple. A mining colony in the Tarsi's asteroid belt had gone silent. No communication for 3 days. The squad was sent to investigate. The team traveled together on a fast assault ship. Lieutenant, a pale mind reader with large dark eyes, was the commanding officer. The rock creature who had been defeated in the trials sat in the corner watching the human with careful respect. A telepathic specialist named kept rubbing her temples and looking nervous. And there was Specialist, a young human combat engineer who was one of only 3 humans in the entire Void Wardens. Was 25 years old. He had bright eyes and an eager smile. He reminded of so many young soldiers he had known over the years. Young soldiers who had died believing the universe made sense. "First real mission," said excitedly as their ship approached the asteroid. "I heard you've been in 17 wars. Any advice?" looked at the young man for a long moment. "Stay close to me, do exactly what I say, and if I tell you to run, you run without asking questions." Smile faded slightly. "That's serious." "Always." The mining colony looked normal when they landed. Lights were on, equipment was running. Food was still warm in the dining hall, but there were no people anywhere. No bodies, no blood, no signs of fighting. Just silence. Felt his stomach tighten. He knew this feeling. He had felt it before on Andros VII, on the research stations in the expedition, on a dozen other worlds where something old and hungry had awakened. "I don't like this," muttered, checking his scanner. "Energy readings are strange, very high, but I can't find the source." Pressed her fingers against her head. Her face had gone pale. "There's something here, something watching us, something old." Her voice trembled. "It knows we're here." Had gone completely still. His eyes moved slowly across the empty corridor, seeing things the others could not see. Shadows that were slightly too dark, air that moved when it should not move. "Everyone back to the ship," he said. His voice was calm but urgent. "Right now." Lieutenant turned to argue. She was the commanding officer. She gave the orders. But then she saw his face and the words died in her throat. In her centuries of service, she had seen fear take many shapes. The human was not afraid. He was resigned. He was accepting something terrible that he had seen too many times before. "It's too late," continued. "It's already between us and the exit. It was waiting for more of us to arrive, waiting for a bigger meal." The lights went out. In the perfect darkness, something vast began to move. It started as whispers, voices calling names in languages that had been dead for 1,000,000 years. Then came the cold, a freezing emptiness that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of the void between stars, the cold of a universe that did not care whether you lived or died. "What is that?" growled. His stone fists glowed with emergency light, but the glow seemed weak and small against the pressing darkness. "Something that existed before your species was born," replied. He had drawn his weapon, but he knew it would not help much. These things did not die easily. It sleeps in the dark places of the galaxy. It wakes when it gets hungry, and it is very, very hungry right now. The squad opened fire. Energy beams and explosive rounds lit up the corridor with flashes of violent light. In those flashes they saw it, not clearly, never clearly, just pieces, shapes that should not exist, angles that hurt to look at, a hunger made solid and given form. Their weapons did nothing. Charged forward with a battle cry that shook the walls. His massive stone fists slammed into the darkness again and again. For a moment, it seemed like his incredible strength might actually hurt the creature. Then something grabbed him, something pulled him into the shadows. His battle cry became a scream, and then there was silence. Lieutenant shouted. She reached out with her mental powers, trying to find him, trying to understand what they were fighting. Her mind touched the entity. For one terrible moment, she saw what it truly was. A thing older than stars. A hunger that had consumed civilizations while humanity was still learning to make fire. A darkness that had been feeding on intelligent life since the universe was young. His eyes went wide. Blood began to pour from her nose. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound that came out was wrong. Broken. The sound of a mind that had shattered into 1,000 pieces. She fell and the darkness took her. Was next, then the others. One by one the squad fell to the hungry shadows. The corridor filled with screams and then silence. Always silence. In the end, only and remained. They stood with their backs against a sealed door, surrounded by darkness that pressed closer with every passing second. Was shaking. Blood ran from a wound in his side. His weapon was empty. His eyes were wide with the kind of fear that breaks minds. "How?" he gasped. "How do you survive this? How have you survived 17 times?" Reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data chip. He pressed it into his trembling hand. "I don't survive," said quietly. "Not really. I just refuse to die. There's a difference." "What is this?" "Everything I've learned in 50 years of fighting these things. Every weakness, every pattern, every way to hurt them." His voice was steady despite the horror surrounding them. "The Coalition doesn't know what they're really fighting. The wars, the conflicts, the extinction events. They're all connected, all symptoms of something bigger. These things are waking up all across the galaxy, and nobody is prepared." "Why are you giving this to me?" Smiled then, a real smile, tired and sad but genuine. "Because I need you to survive. I need someone to carry this knowledge forward, someone to train the next generation, someone to be ready when these things wake up again." He pushed toward a small maintenance hatch in the wall. "That leads to the emergency shuttle bay. Go now, don't look back." "What about you?" "I'm going to do what I always do, turn to face the pressing darkness. I'm going to make it angry enough to forget about you." The shadows surged forward. Walked into them. Heard the human's voice one last time echoing through the darkness. It was not a scream of fear. It was a battle cry, a declaration of war against something ancient and terrible. Then there was only silence. Ran. He crawled through the maintenance tunnel with tears streaming down his face. He found the emergency shuttle. He launched himself into space, clutching the data chip like a holy relic. Behind him, the mining colony began to shake. Lights flickered deep inside. Something was happening in there, something violent. Flew toward the distant lights of Coalition space, carrying the knowledge of 17 wars and the sacrifice of a man who had refused to die. 3 days passed. A Coalition rescue team arrived at the mining colony. They expected to find death and destruction. They expected to find nothing left alive. Instead, they found the lights working, the equipment running. The terrible presence that had filled those dark corridors was gone, driven back, retreated to whatever void it called home. They found 8 bodies, the remains of Void Squad 7, killed by something the official reports would never accurately describe. And they found 1 survivor. Sat in the medical bay of the rescue ship, wrapped in a thermal blanket. His wound had been treated, but his eyes still held the haunted look of someone who had seen too much. He clutched the data chip in his hands like it was the most precious thing in the universe. Coalition intelligence officers questioned him 17 times. He told them everything: the darkness, the entity, the way it had taken his one by one, the way Park had walked into the shadows to buy him time to escape. They did not believe him. They never believed the survivors. That was what had told him. The official report would list the incident as a hostile alien attack, species unknown, successfully repelled. The truth was too strange, too frightening for the Coalition to accept. But knew the truth now. He had spent the 3 days of travel reading the contents of his data chip, 50 years of documentation, star maps marking sleeping horrors throughout the galaxy, weaknesses discovered through decades of blood and sacrifice, patterns that connected seemingly random disasters across hundreds of worlds. The galaxy was not safe. It had never been safe. Ancient things slept in the dark spaces between stars, and they were starting to wake up. The medical bay door slid open. Commander Telos walked in. His large compound eyes were unreadable, his insect face showing no expression. "We recovered another survivor from the asteroid," he said slowly. His head snapped up, his heart began to pound. Park stood in the doorway. The human looked terrible. His clothes were burned and torn. His face was pale and marked with wounds that had not been there before. His hair, which had been dark with streaks of, was now completely white. But he was alive. Hal whispered, his voice cracked with emotion. "I saw you walk into that thing. I felt you die. Felt it too before she." "I did die." Limped across the room and sat down heavily on the bed beside. Every movement seemed to cause him pain. But dying and staying dead are different things. Humans learned that lesson a long time ago. He looked up at Commander Telos, who had gone very still. The entity will return. These things always do, but I heard it badly enough that you have time. Maybe 20 or 30 years before it wakes up and gets hungry again. You've done this before, Telos said. It was not a question. 17 times, 17 different horrors, 17 temporary victories. Closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they held the weight of centuries. The galaxy is old, Commander, and there are things sleeping in the dark that have eaten civilization since before your species evolved. The Coalition thinks it's fighting pirates and rebels and the occasional hostile alien. It has no idea what's really out there. And humans do. Laughed, it was a hollow, exhausted sound. Humans have been crawling out of graves since we first learned to walk upright. We have survived ice ages that froze the world, plagues that killed half our population, wars that destroyed entire nations. We have stared into the void over and over again, and every time we refused to blink first. He turned to look at. That is why I gave you the chip. I will not live forever. Not really. Sooner or later, something out there will finish the job, but the knowledge survives. It passes on. And the next time one of these things wakes up, there will be someone ready to shove it back into the dark. His hands tightened on the data chip. The weight of responsibility settled onto his shoulders. Not the burden of one man's memories, but the duty of everyone who would come after. I understand, he said quietly. Commander Telos stood in silence for a long moment. Then he did something that no officer of his rank had ever done to a human before. He bowed. His massive insect body bent at the waist, compound eyes lowered in respect. It was a gesture reserved for the greatest heroes of the Coalition, warriors who had saved entire worlds. The Void Wardens would be honored to have you continue your service, Soldier Park, Telos said, for as long as you are willing to fight. Looked at, the young human's face had changed. The fear was still there, buried deep, but something else had grown alongside it, a quiet determination, a stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. Looks like you have two soldiers, said. Nodded slowly. For the first time in many years, something like hope flickered in his tired eyes. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time he would not have to fight alone. Somewhere in the deep void between stars, the ancient entity stirred in its wounded sleep. It remembered the taste of the small creature that had hurt it, that burning defiance, that absolute refusal to surrender even when facing certain death. It would remember that taste for a very long time. And it would be more careful next time. In the halls of the Coalition, a legend began to spread. The story of the human who had died 17 times and refused to stay dead. The soldier whose battle record was written in the blood of horrors that other species could not comprehend. The man who walked into darkness and walked out again, carrying the knowledge that might one day save everyone. They had laughed at his record. They had looked at the small, quiet human and seen nothing special. Just another fragile creature from a primitive world. Just another soldier who would break under pressure. They had been wrong. The galaxy was old and full of terrors. Ancient things slept in the spaces between stars. Darkness waited patiently for its next meal. But humanity had spent 10,000 years learning one simple lesson. When the universe knocked them down, they got back up. When extinction came calling, they answered with stubborn defiance. When everything seemed lost, they found a way to keep fighting. Park was not a hero. He was simply human. And sometimes, in a galaxy full of monsters and darkness, that was enough. The data chip in his hands contained the wisdom of 50 years of impossible wars. It would be studied, expanded, passed down through generations of soldiers who would learn to fight the things that lurked in the shadows. And when the darkness returned, as it always did, humanity would be ready. They would always be ready. Because that was what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They refused to give up no matter how hopeless things seemed. The universe had spent billions of years creating horrors beyond imagination. Humanity had spent 10,000 years learning to kill them anyway. And they were just getting started.